For any of you guys that have been following my In & Opal's YouTube channel over the last few years, you'll know that I have an almost obsession with not letting anything go to waste. If I buy an Opal parcel for thousands of dollars, I'm going to use every part of that parcel that I possibly can to create something that will help me generate enough revenue to cover the cost of the parcel and make a little bit of profit so I can buy more rough opal or better rough opal. If you have small opal chips lying around, I'm going to show you one of my favorite things to do with those chips, which is create opal mosaics. And they're not particularly hard to cut, and they're great. They make great gifts, and if you're chasing that almighty dollar, they're a great way to generate some extra revenue to help you pay for more or better opal. Flat face to start with. Then I do the back, left and right. I start defining the edges. The number one question I get about cutting opal mosaics is how do you cut the pieces that are so small? It's mostly putting them in between your two index fingers, and it's kind of a rolling motion that you can use to cut them. You start cutting the pieces one at a time and then placing them over the top of your design until essentially you cover the whole thing. Now if you're using opal chips that have color all the way through, then it doesn't really matter how they're placed on there. What you want to try to avoid is a situation where the color bars that run through the chips are dispersed, so some of them are on the top and some of them are on the bottom like this. If you do this after everything is set and you grind down and polish from the top, then you're not going to have color on all of your opals. This is going to look dodgy. You don't want this. What you want to do is line up the color bars either on the bottom or on the top so that whenever you grind down, all of the color will match and you'll get good color from every one of your chips, something like this. They can either be lined up on the bottom close to the potch or lined up on the top. Now in this example I've lined up all of my color facing down, so I want to put the potch essentially up, but I can't do that because the chips would move all around. So what I need to do is I put some tape on the top, some packing tape, and then I flip it over and I put some cloth tape on the back. The cloth tape is more sticky than the packing tape, so whenever I turn it over again I can peel the packing tape off and all of the opals will stick to the cloth tape. Now that they're stuck down, I can get the epoxy and put it in between the cracks and epoxy all of the chips onto my black potch backing. Here I'm adding some black oxide to my epoxy and putting it all over the chips. I actually suggest doing this with a paintbrush if you have one, and then you can use the paintbrush to push the mixture down in between the cracks, and it'll make it so that you don't get any air bubbles. If you're using 330 as your epoxy, you can wash your paintbrush out with acetone and you can use it again and again. Once it's all stuck together, we wait for 24 hours for everything to set up, and then we peel the tape off. Now when you peel the tape, it's really important, don't pull it up. You want to peel the tape directly across the surface, right? And that way you won't accidentally pull any chips up. Now the first step here is to grind off any of the overhanging chips. A warning here, do not use your roughest wheel for this. I'm on my 230 grit centered wheel doing this. I have had opals pop out during this process if I'm using like an 80 grit wheel, so use a finer wheel and take a little bit more time to do this part, and it'll make sure that you don't have any issues. Now that the sides are cleaned up, you'll remember that I put my color facing up, right? So it was down facing towards the design, but right now the color is up. So I know that my color is not very deep on these chips. I don't want to cut very deep into them because I know that the deeper I cut, the more likely it is going to be that I'm going to be cutting into areas of opal that are not precious opal, and I don't want any dead chips in this mosaic. So I only cut off exactly what I need to and no more here. Now unfortunately, because I was using my stick instead of my paintbrush, I've got a couple of little areas here where the mix of 330 and black oxide didn't go all the way to the surface. They create these little bitty holes, which is a bit of a pain, but you can absolutely fix this. Just mix up a little bit more 330 and black oxide. I get a little nail and then I push that mix into those little holes, let it set for another 24 hours, and then grind it off again. Now the rest of this process is just like polishing up any other big opal. We've got plenty of videos on this if you're interested. With mosaics like this, I finish them off with a slurry of wet cerium oxide on medium felt. Sometimes the cerium is hard to get out of the cracks, so 6 minutes in a sonic cleaner or a little bit of electric toothbrush action does the trick. If you're stuck for ideas on what to do, I use the art generator, AI art generator Night Cafe for this particular design. It was free to sign up. It's a fun little tool to play with. Anything that looks like a stained glass window is going to be good for mosaic making. This was going to be a gift, so I wanted a little story to go with it, something maybe about an opal frog, and I thought maybe in the style of an Australian Aboriginal tale might be appropriate.
There was once a small green frog who lived in the heart of the Australian bush. His name was Kikuyu, and he was known throughout the land as the mischievous trickster. One day, while out exploring, Kikuyu came across a magnificent kookaburra perched atop a tree branch. Kikuyu, being the curious and bold creature that he was, decided to approach the kookaburra and introduce himself. But the kookaburra, being a wise and proud bird, was not impressed by Kikuyu's antics. In fact, the kookaburra saw Kikuyu as a nuisance and warned him to stay away. Kikuyu, however, did not listen. He continued to pester the kookaburra, teasing and taunting him, until finally the kookaburra had had enough. With a fierce cry, the kookaburra swooped down and attacked Kikuyu, using his sharp beak to peck and scratch at the frog. Kikuyu, being much smaller and weaker, was no match for the powerful kookaburra, and he soon lay defeated at the bird's feet. As Kikuyu lay there, battered and bruised, the kookaburra looked down upon him with disgust. "You have brought this upon yourself, foolish frog," the kookaburra said. "You should have learned to respect your elders and listen to their wisdom." And with that, the kookaburra flew away, leaving Kikuyu alone and ashamed. But as Kikuyu lay there, he began to feel a strange warmth spreading throughout his body. Slowly, his green skin began to shimmer and glow until it was transformed into the most beautiful opal the world had ever seen. And so, Kikuyu the frog became Kikuyu the opal, a symbol of the power of wisdom and the dangers of arrogance and deceit. From that day on, Kikuyu was revered as a sacred and magical being, and his story was passed down through the generations as a cautionary tale of the perils of not listening to the wisdom of those who came before us.